Okay, welcome to the Monday edition of the Sumer Sports Show. I'm here with Thomas Dimitroff, the CEO of Sumer Sports. Thomas, a heck of a weekend of football, man. I wasn't expecting much. I think we got a little bit more than we bargained for, and not only that, but we get to cap it off with a rematch of the Super Bowl last season, Philadelphia and Kansas City. So not much to complain about. Thomas, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Super Rica, I'm ready to go. It's Thanksgiving time, right? The weather here in the South is great. I think it's going to be good, and I can't wait to talk football today. Let's just roll into it. I know we have limited time. It's been sorry for the delay, everyone. It's put it on me. There's so much going on right now.
Oh, there's so much going on, and it's there's a and to that aim, by the way, I do want to say like a little bit of a programming note. We will not have a Wednesday or Friday show version of this show. I might get on and do like a little Q&A on Friday if there's time, but for the most part, we're simultaneously incredibly busy with one or two fewer days of work, and yet we're going to get a little bit of a break on Thursday, and some of us on Friday. As a result. So this is going to be the last show of the week. Hopefully you guys will understand that as far as this is concerned. This is always our most popular show, the Monday one. Anyway, so let's dive in. I do want to talk briefly, Thomas, because there was some news today. The Jets have put Zach Wilson on the bench in favor of Tim Boyle. Tim Boyle, formerly of UConn, and then I believe Eastern Kentucky. He was Aaron Rodgers' backup for a bunch of years in New York, and now in Green Bay, and now he takes over as an actual starter. He's only started, I believe, 2 or 3 games his whole career. I believe it's 2 for Detroit back in 2021. It has not been pretty. The Jets really good defensively, but at some point there's that tension between a very good defensive team and an offense that can't move the football. And the Jets had to do something. What do you think? This is a very tough spot. I know we talked about it a number of times on the show where Joe Douglas, Robert Salah have both done a really good job of building a roster on the defensive side of the ball. There's talent on the offensive side of the ball. Some of bad luck with the quarterback injury, but some, you can make a case. Okay, Minnesota's getting by with a backup quarterback. Cleveland's getting by with a backup quarterback. There have been teams that have gotten by without their preferred starter at the position, and yet the Jets seem here helpless with Zach Wilson at the helm. What was your thought when you first heard of the news that Zach Wilson was going to the bench in favor of Tim Boyle?
Well, I mean, obviously, it's not an easy move when you sit down with your head coach and you know that seats are hot. You know that you're not sure what direction the owner is going to go. And, historically, that ownership there has been fairly understanding about quarterback situations, fairly. I've said time and again, Joe Douglas is a very good evaluator. And you're right. They do have good football players on that team, definitely on the defensive side, and they do on the offensive side. How it's put together and how you scheme around your talent, your young talent, is a big thing on the head coach, indirectly on the general manager. I've said this time and again as well. A lot of owners out there, you as a general manager are being judged on how your quarterback situation plays out. And you can only go so many times, so many iterations before that owner starts saying, okay, what's going on here? That's not, in the end, we've seen a lot of really good football people be moved on from. I am not in any way suggesting that. Joe Douglas needs to stay there. He needs to continue to work on that quarterback situation. But there are owners out there that would pull the trigger right away on things like that. Believe me, that can happen. This group needs to do what's right for the organization, and that's to get the right quarterback in there to help them win games. And you can't throw 81 yards, right? I mean, you can't have I know you don't like the passer rating, but 57.9, which, by the way, I know in San Francisco there was a perfect one, and you can argue why that is not the case. But can I just finish with this on that? Again, you go to sleep at night after a game like that, and you wake up in the morning, or you wake up at 3 a.m. as a GM, and you're looking at the ceiling, and you're like, oh my God, we are going to have to make this move, which is going to be devastating to a lot, and maybe another notch on the stake, so to speak. I don't know.
You want to stack things in the left column and not the right column. And the Zach Wilson thing is a loss. Like I think, ultimately I'm the same as you, where I think of, Douglas, got a pretty good player in Wilson, great player in Sauce Gardner. Jermaine Johnson has been productive. Josh Huff has been a guy who's been really productive for them as a pass rusher. Like there's more goods than bads, but to your point, the quarterback position is oftentimes all that matters. And you look across the league and the San Francisco 49ers have really been the only case historically of a team that can compete for multiple seasons in a row without elite quarterback play. It's almost always this like ebb and flow. When I mean compete, I mean for a Super Bowl. I think that you can kind of be middling for a while. Let's say like Minnesota was, even though Cousins is kind of, like a little bit a notch below all those elite guys. It's just so incredibly hard to compete at a high level because as you get better, right? You remember the sort of like the Super Bowl curse of like Larry Brown gets 2 interceptions in the Super Bowl. He's signed by the Raiders the next year. He's not any good. Desmond Howard is MVP of the Super Bowl. He gets signed by the Raiders. He's not any like over all the teams when you end up being good because of things other than the quarterback, the teams pillage your players, right? They take all your great players and so it's so hard to win consistently because a defense requires 11 players playing in a certain or more than that in many cases in a really impactful way. That's only going to last for so long in a salary cap league because you constantly have to draft well, you constantly have to retain your own players under the cap, and you have to be able to let the right players go when the time comes. And there really aren't that many teams that are willing to do that all that consistently. On the other side with quarterback, the quarterback really drives the car, so to speak, when you look back to those New England teams, and it's like Aaron Dobson, it's Algie Crumpler, it's Julian Edelman taking over for Wes Welker. It's this constant cycle, but the quarterback remains the mainstay. When you don't have that mainstay on your roster, it's so hard to have sustained success.
What, if you could pull it up right now, what is this regime's record? I think it's really important for us to continue to chat about this. Talking about Joe and Robert, where are they right now?
Yeah, let's look at Robert Salah because I think that one's a little cleaner because Joe Douglas came in an intermediate time. But Douglas's record Salah's record as the coach of the Jets is 15 and 29. So a 340 winning percentage, 341 winning percentage. You have the 4 and 13 in Zach Wilson's first year. I think you can write that off as, hey, we're breaking in a rookie quarterback, yada, yada, yada. Last year at 7 and 10. Now that started 7 and 4 and finished 7 and 10. Oh, again, I think a lot of people would say, well, that was a bad quarterback that ruined that situation. And then this year they're 4 and 6. They were 4 and 3, Thomas, until they've had some rough luck of it. Down the stretch here, so they do have good enough players, in my opinion, to compete if they get rudimentary quarterback play, and I think that's what they're shooting for here with Boyle.
And look, I mean, we've said this. Jeff Ulbrich is top notch. He's de-coordinating them very, very well, as we know. And you're right. You know, in the end, it comes down to what you're talking about as far as making sure you have someone at the helm. They lost what they're doing with Aaron. There needs to always be a secondary plan, right? I mean, Aaron Rodgers, when you start dealing with people that are 35 plus, is he 30? How old is Aaron Rodgers?
Rodgers is, so he was drafted in 2005. So he's like 40, 41.
Yeah. So, I mean, you have to plan, right? I remember sitting down with Arthur Blank so many times. He used to get so agitated with me. He's like, where is our backup quarterback? And I'd say, well, we've been very fortunate. He said, yes, we 1.5 games we've ever lost with Matt Ryan, but it's going to nip us. And, we were very fortunate during our time. It didn't. In this situation, you have to plan for that, right? So, okay, I guess I ask you about the percentages because that fan base, how long, what is their patience? How long does Woody Johnson and co., how long do they deal with the complaining about that? Or is that fan base strong enough to say, let's wait and see if we get back Aaron Rodgers before we start throwing darts?
Yeah, Rodgers, by the way, is 12 days away from his 40th birthday per Football Reference, so 40-ish years old. It's a good question. Like, this is a Jets team that has not made the playoffs since 2010. Those were the Mark Sanchez years where they made 2 consecutive conference title games with a great defense and really kind of rudimentary quarterback play to the point here. It's a little bit different now with quarterback play, but also Sanchez is much better, as limited as he was. He's much better than what Zach Wilson has given them. And so I think like there's that issue. They have not won the division, Thomas, since before you were with the Patriots. 2002, they finished 9-7 in a 3-way tie with the Patriots, as well as I believe the Dolphins. They ended up winning the division. And in fact, they shut out the Indianapolis Colts in the playoffs that year with Peyton Manning in their last home playoff game. So it's been a long time. And I think when I think about this, Jets fans are kind of like Lions fans in that way, where there hasn't been much success for a while. There hasn't been a lot in the way of hope. And I think obviously Aaron Rodgers gives them hope. And I think that they want to wait it out. Now, the Lions gave Matt Patricia and his regime 2.5 years to do what they did. They only went to Matt Patricia, Thomas, you remember this, because they were sick and tired of Jim Caldwell finishing 10-6 and 9-7, but not being able to win. Patricia bottomed them out. They went and like sort of cleaned house. And now they're where they are at 8-2 for the first time since 1952. So I think if you're a Jets fan, you're like, okay, we've waited this long. What's another year to see if Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas can get it around with Aaron Rodgers? You only have to give up a 2nd-round pick now for Rodgers instead of a 1st because of his injury. So there's a little bit of hope there. There's rumors, and I want to get your idea on this, because this is where I think your mind as a GM really could benefit. There are rumors that the Jets are going to go after Davante Adams again. Now, if you're in that chair and you're thinking to yourself, I'm in charge of the 53 ostensibly, or at least I'm in charge of the play, getting the players in the building, and yet there is such an influence by the quarterback who has played 4 snaps for this team so far. That's an awkwardness that I would be tough to, part of me is like, if I get fired, I'm going to go out my own way. And then the other part, there's Alan Lazard, there's Randall Cobb, there's Tim Boyle, there's Nathaniel Hackett. There's this Packers influence on this team that in many ways, Joe Douglas probably would not do if he had his own druthers about this, but yet he's inextricably tied to Rodgers. How awkward is that?
It's awkward, and Joe's got to stand up strong, understand that he did what he did to get, Aaron in the circle of, trust. I get it, but he's got to pull that team together, of his own volition, right? I mean, you can't be, and I'm not saying he is doing it, but he has to look at it, listen to what someone like Aaron does and knows and projects, and I think it's important to look at it. However, you have to look yourself in the mirror and know that you're putting together what you think is going to be the best situation for your team, for the talent you have, and it's not all about Aaron Rodgers. And that's not easy to do when you have such a strong personality. I mean, look what Brian Gutekunst had to deal with in Green Bay. I'm sure Joe's dealing with it in a different way. As I've heard, they get along very well, which is good, and you have to listen. But to me, if you're asking, would I do all of those moves just because it's appeasing him? Of course not. Even more so, I would stand up to it and say, look, we need to bring in this guy, and this guy because they're younger or they fit in with our team better. It's really, really important to make sure you walk on your own as Joe Douglas, especially in these precarious times. And I will say, I agree with you. I don't believe personally that Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh need to go anywhere this year. I do not. I think they need to really hone in here and see how they respond to a quarterback they know is no longer their future. I'm saying the young guy. And then Aaron Rodgers not coming back. How do they deal with that? Then I think an owner has to look at that and make a decision.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the tragic part of this whole thing is that, Ahmad Gardner, Garrett Wilson, some of those young guys you're using up some of their cheap years, right? And like those are great football players. Quinnen Williams, you already gave a contract to. Quincy Williams, is eventually going to, I believe he might have. I have to look at his contract status, but like you're starting to like build this great defense, and the question becomes like, okay, you're ready-made for a Super Bowl. You only had the span to bring in Rodgers for a certain amount of time. That may or may not work. Now, what is your next pivot? And if you're a Jets fan, they say, "Oh, we'll draft the young guy." It's like, okay, well, since the last time they made the Super Bowl, last time they've won their division, it's been Sanchez, which had its ups and downs. It was Darnold, which had its ups and downs. It's had Wilson, which has had its ups and downs, mostly downs. And it's like, I can understand why they're not that patient to draft the next great Jets quarterback, because that player really hasn't been a guy in the NFL since maybe like Ken O'Brien in the 80s. And so it's just a really hard thing to sell to a fan base / an owner.
And the caveat is, of course, after I just defended that regime, which I do feel strongly about, mainly leading with Joe, is as an owner, you have to decide, do I really want to kick this off with a new quarterback, with an old group, and then all of a sudden I'm making a change potentially next year for some reason or another, and then all of a sudden you don't have a new regime bringing in their own ideas of who they want, right? That's always been a discussion point. So I'm sure the owner has to sit down and think through this a lot, especially on the coaching side.
Yeah, we don't have a ton more time in the show, so I do want to briefly drive by with these two statements. A, good on Buffalo. They made a switch at offensive coordinator. It wasn't because of Ken Dorsey. The offense struggled, but certainly Joe Brady did a really good job against the top 5 defense in the first stint. Now, a lot of it was field position. A lot of it was the fact that their defense didn't have the leaks that it had in the first time they played the Jets. But the Bills, stand tall. They're now 6-5. By the way, we talk about the Rodgers old team. Really impressive win at home for Green Bay. By the way, Matt LaFleur, who's been under a lot of scrutiny, they were helped out a little bit by drops and stuff like that by the Los Angeles Chargers. But now that team is sitting at 4-6. They have a tough Thanksgiving matchup on Thursday against Detroit in Detroit that will go a long way. But they don't really have a tough schedule left, Thomas, the Packers. And you're starting to see Jordan Love look the part of an NFL quarterback, which has been a really fun thing, I know, for Packers fans to watch over the past 3 or 4 weeks, is the maturation of Love. I'm going to stick, though, in the Packers division. We're going to talk about the Vikings Broncos. Broncos, a team close to one of the places you live. Going into the game, both of these teams were kind of riding high on some really unsustainable stuff, right? The Vikings were, winning a bunch of one-score games with a quarterback who was just, traded off the scrap heap. And the Broncos right now are just living off of turnovers and plays deep in their opponent's territory. And the game last night ended exactly like you would have thought. It was a 1-point game in a game where the point spread was 2.5. So it ended the way that we all expected it to. And it was, it was a very interesting football game. The Vikings this season, Thomas, are 3rd worst in the NFL in turnover expected point differential. So they're giving up more points, and it's about 35 points than they're getting in turnovers. And you saw that last night. But they are 2nd best in the NFL in terms of penalty differential, meaning they're giving up fewer penalties than they're getting, and it's to the tune of about 25 points. We only saw the 2nd point of that last night, Thomas, which is that they turned the ball over 3 times, and Denver took advantage of it to the tune of a 21-20 victory. When you're watching that game, Tom, did you think? I kind of came out of that game like shrugging my shoulders, being like, these are 2 kind of whatever NFL teams right now. What did you think?
I just keep coming back to really honing in on Russell Wilson, right? I'm always doing that for some reason. I want to go back and forth a little bit on this. When you watch him right now, do you have the same feeling of, does this guy really need to be here next year? I know there's a lot of money involved. That's a whole other thing. But does Sean Payton, when you see him on the sidelines, does he look at him with like, I'm pulling for this guy? Or is he looking at him like every time something happens wrong, that he's like, if a ball's off or something, is he just shaking his head? Where is he? I don't want to answer for him, but I wonder your feelings about it, because I look and I'm thinking, he's getting slower and slower. Of course, we know that. I don't know if do you have some cool data to pull up here?
Well, brother, I was thinking the exact same thing. I was watching Sean Payton, and he has that like shit-eating grin on his face during points of the game where I wouldn't be smiling if I needed Russ to like make this play, right? I had sort of a lot of the same ideas in you, and I know we have a frequent listener, Amy, who is constantly asking about Russell Wilson's contract. So I figured I would just bring it up. These are our friends at Over the Cap, Jason Fitzgerald, does a phenomenal job. In fact, he does a really good job of promoting Sumer on his website. And so I wanted to return the favor. This is the Russell Wilson contract, Thomas. And if you look, there's one like sneaky thing that's in this that people, it is, I wouldn't say a limitation of the way that we look at contracts, but so next year, Wilson's base salary of $17 million is fully guaranteed. If he is on the roster by the 5th day of the 2024 calendar year, so by March this year, that $37 million that you see, I'm going to put my cursor over it, $37 million in terms of base salary, that becomes fully guaranteed as well. And so while you look over here at the right-hand side, which, Over the Cap does such a phenomenal job. If they were to cut him next year, pre-June 1, they would take on $85 million in dead cap, and they would actually lose almost $50 million in cap space. If they did post-June 1, so post-June 1, they designate him, they only get a $35.4 million dead cap charge, and they don't lose any cap savings. Now, the rest of the deal, so if you look at these 18.4, those all get accelerated into 2025. So they'll still be paying the debts in 2025 as well. But there is a legitimate way, Thomas, that they can get out of this Russell Wilson deal if they were to cut him, at the beginning of the league year this year, and basically designated a post June 1 cut, which means they have to hold on. They basically can't make any moves until the following until post June 1. But they can certainly cut him without any. They can cut him without it being like incredibly onerous on the franchise at the beginning of this league year. And they have to, because if they don't, the $55 million that he's owed as a paragraph 5 in 25 becomes fully guaranteed. So to me, unless they can find a trade partner, which I think feels unlikely, I do think that this is Russell Wilson's last year in Denver.
And interestingly enough, I look at those numbers like everyone does. And if you're a team builder, GM, and a head coach, when you're looking at it, you're thinking, I better be getting a lot out of this football player. We can't just be eking out these wins, right? When you're talking about that kind of money, you're thinking that those numbers and those wins, resemble someone who is very midline, right? Of course, that's not a midline contract. So, that's human nature to think that way. And it's not rocket science, of course. It's just like, wow, we have a lot of money in this guy, and we are just getting by. Some we're winning, some we're losing. What are they now? Are they fives? Is that 5 wins, right?
Yeah, they're 5-5. They're on a 4-game winning streak. A lot of it is pretty noisy because of turnovers and stuff. When you look at their offense, they're 18th in the NFL in terms of EPA per play generated on offense. If you just look at EPA per pass, which is kind of Russell Wilson's deal, they are, I got to find this. They're 20th in EPA per pass. So this is not a great offense. The defense actually, Thomas, over the last little bit here, when you look at, even after they surrendered just a horrendous, week against, they are still last in EPA allowed, but it has gotten better over the course of the last few weeks. When you look at them from a league table standpoint, because we want to look at their likelihood of making the playoffs. When you look at their likelihood to make the playoffs, they are 20th in the NFL at 14.6, just a 0.5% chance of winning the division title because of where the Chiefs are. But if you look at something, they've gotten the hard part of their schedule out of the way. They've had the 5th hardest schedule to this point. And when you look at strength of schedule after, it's not exactly a cakewalk. It's still it's actually only the 19th toughest. So it's not a cakewalk, but it's also not above average in terms of the league. So this is a team that, they bank some wins here. They probably wish they didn't blow an 18-point, they wish they didn't blow an 18-point lead to the Washington Commanders in week 2 at home. That way they'd be 6-4 and really in the driver's seat. But they're in a spot where if they continue to win football games, they'll make the playoffs. The interesting thing is there's really nothing in their data, including Russell Wilson's data, that says they'll continue to win football games.
Great points. We can spin around to the next game, but I don't know what else there is to say. Look,
I just think, Minnesota is another one where, they've gotten unlucky with turnovers. I think Kevin O'Connell's, done a really good job there. the fake punt they had the other night was fantastic. The call that they had on the 3rd and forever to put the, ultimately they couldn't get it done. But I don't think that bodes poorly. I mean, without Justin Jefferson, without Kirk Cousins, they're continuing to be competitive in every game. That's exactly the coaching job I think that you want from a guy like O'Connell, to keep things kind of like interesting, keep them in the playoff hunt. They'll probably make the playoffs in the NFC. But a disappointing loss last night because, frankly, now, Detroit is 8-2 in the 8-2, and they're 6-5. So they had a shot to kind of be in that division race. And I think, Detroit, easy schedule down the stretch. Unless Minnesota sweeps them, I don't think that Minnesota will have a chance to win that division, which is unfortunate.
I needed Hawkinson to catch those two. I mean, I love Hawkinson, but I'm like 2 on the flat. We went the same thing, and he drops both of them.
Not to get degenerate, but there was a lot of sports bettors that needed Hawkinson to catch those two because his prop was 5.5 catches. He went into that last drive with 4 and dropped 2, and he would have went over and so those drops cost a lot of people some money last night. So it's unfortunate because honestly, Hawkinson has played really inspired football. He leads the NFL in receiving yards by a tight end. I know our friend Scott Pioli tweeted that out today as part of his statistical deep dive, which was fun to see. Let's briefly talk one last time.
Do the degenerates of the gambling world look at that and deep in beer, do they throw darts at Hawk saying that he had a deal done on another way and he was gonna drop the ball?
Like there is. So let's finish up with this. We were going to talk about Stroud. I think Stroud played fine. He threw some picks, but they ultimately won. And I think Stroud came off as a non-perfect, but still good quarterback this week. Mm-hmm. But let's talk briefly about that because there is all this discussion now that gambling being a huge part of the NFL now, right? Where they sponsor stadiums and they sponsor ad space. And you look at, the broadcasts now talk about gambling more readily and stuff. There are these question marks about whether or not, about whether or not these games are fixed or things like that, or whether or not these little small things happen that cause the point spread to move one way or the other. There was a game we talked about Stroud where they were favored by 2.5. Their kicker was injured in the game. And instead of trying to kick an extra point, they kneeled down. They won by 2. Tampa Bay covers. Everybody's like, oh, this is a fixed game. There's no such thing as fixed games. But it does bring up an interesting quandary where if everything is bettable, then, where does the NFL sit as far as integrity? Where does the NFL sit as far as, making sure that there's fair play and that players, the big one last week, Thomas, was Joe Burrow on Thursday night, right? He had a wrist injury, wasn't in the practice report. So everybody bet all these, Joe Burrow props. He goes injured after 2 quarters and everybody's like, I want my money back. And the books are like, go bleep yourself. That's, I think, the one place where the NFL really has to be careful is injury reports. The injury reports, that's the one source where I think if NFL teams aren't honest, I think the bettors can probably, they have a gripe in some ways over whether or not the NFL is acting as a faithful actor in terms of sports betting.
I know we have to move on. We're abbreviating this, but I do want to talk not about hot seats. There are hot seats 10 in, right? Let's jump around for a minute, for just 2 or 3 minutes here. I'm going to throw them to you. How do you think Staley handled the media being hot, out in LA?
I'm inclined to like Staley because I think he's got a disposition but Staley interacted with the media like he knew he was getting fired.
So, okay, good. Move on. Eberflus, what's your thought on this?
I think that one's touch and go for sure. I think it was a good effort by the Bears yesterday, but you have to win that game.
Do you think it affects Ryan Poles?
I think it could go either way. I think it's either the start of them being competitive every game with Justin Fields and hence everybody keeping their job, or it's we really had a chance to beat the Lions. We lost to them, and then we lost our mojo as a result, and we lost every game down the stretch, and everybody got fired. AKA, right, the New York Giants. Remember when the Giants gave Joe Judge the vote of confidence? Yep. And they lost a couple close games, and then they just started playing JV football and everybody got fired, even though I think yesterday's game could have gone could start something either direction for the Bears.
Tennessee, you talk about Mike Vrabel, who's deemed as one of the best coaches out there, but they continue to struggle here. What do you think they do? Does he truly potentially go somewhere else? Because, again, I'm not spinning things, but let's just say there is an opening at New England because Bill goes and becomes a hero somewhere else, and he goes there. Would that team look to get rid of him after they just finished lauding him as being one of the better coaches out there?
I actually, somebody in the league asked me this question. I said, if he left after, reportedly running the GM out of the building a year earlier, again, that's just the reports, right? I'm not, that would look really bad.
Antonio,
right? And if you're Tennessee and you fired your GM who built a team that went to the 1 seed in the AFC in 2021, the conference championship game in 2019, if you fired that general manager to appease this coach and then only to get rid of that coach a year later or for him to leave, that would be really weird, I think.
It'd be very weird. Antonio Pierce, Raiders. I know they were talking about Pierce. Go ahead.
I think Pierce stays. You're talking about 2 wins and a very competitive game against what many believe is a good football team in the Dolphins. I think Pierce stays, and I think it almost never works when an interim coach stays. I mean, I think you can talk about Jason Garrett was a Dallas coach for a while after being an interim coach, but it doesn't really work. But I do think Al Davis is going to say, the last time we had Rich Bisaccia, he did a pretty good job. We moved on. That didn't work. We're going to overcorrect here and go with Antonio Pierce, linebacker. Interesting.
Last one I have. How devastating of a loss was that Rams-Seahawks game?
If you're the Seahawks, it was that. So you went into the week with the same record as the Niners, right? And a lot of people are like, oh, they're toe and toe. They haven't played the Niners yet, right? You lose that game, and now you're 7-point home dogs on Thanksgiving night to the Niners. No one believes that you're a contender for that division. No one believes you're a real contender for the NFC. And getting swept by a Rams team that's clearly rebuilding is not a good look. And I love I almost called him Jameis, Geno Smith, for coming back and gutting it out at the end and putting them in field goal position. But the end of game had to have been handled better, I think.
As always, I wanted you to twist in some gaming ideas, but probably not the place here at Sumer Sport right now to talk about it. But I'm always fascinated by your mind. Maybe another time, another place over a beer or 2 or a bottle of wine. Another time.
We have some luminaries coming into the office tomorrow. I can't wait, and maybe we'll twist that in with them tomorrow.
I'm really excited. And by the way, Sumer Sport does do that. Just so everyone knows, we're always looking to grow, learn. We're all about professional development, and we dip into not just football, basketball, baseball. We have some former GMs coming in from the NBA, and we also have some unbelievable statisticians. Why don't you throw out his name just because you're the data guy?
I can. If Kirk's watching, I have a copy of your book, but he's Sprawl Ball, which is one of my favorites. In fact, I just got done writing a paper where I referenced it because it's so it's seminal in the way that we look at basketball. So I'm excited to meet him and obviously talk shop and to your point, like over the last month at Sumer, we've had incredible people come through the office, and I think that's a testament, obviously, to your leadership and what we're promising out there, and obviously the people that we brought in the building who are all, in my opinion, world class at what they do. So it's cool. I know we have an abbreviated show today. Both of us were incredibly busy, but I still think it was really fun. And honestly, my favorite parts of the show sometimes are when you just fire questions to me and I get to answer them and talk about what were you thinking when Seattle blew a 13-point lead to the Rams yesterday. It wasn't pretty, for sure.
Well, look, last thing I will say, so bringing in Kurt, we're also bringing in Chris Grant, former GM of the Cavaliers, great basketball mind. He is always a treat to talk business. I was going to try to bring in Danny Ferry as well because, that we're kind of in the NBA mode a little bit, trying to chat here. But so yes, thanks on that. And then back to questions. I love them. It always honestly puts me to a spot of daydreaming about you being an AGM and us being at an organization where I'm firing you questions, and you'll always be there with a smile and open eyes to give me a good answer. You're not, you're quick. You're not just You always have a strong opinion. So definitely appreciate that.
Not always right, but I do eventually get to the right answer, I think, after seeing enough evidence, which I'm always proud to do. So this has been great. Thank you all for joining the Monday show, even a little bit late. Quick programming note, we are going to have Stats and Schemes with Sean and Tage tomorrow, and then we will run reruns of this show Wednesday and Friday. And obviously for all of you, happy Thanksgiving if you're in the US, but happy Thanksgiving in general. Even to those who don't live in the US, because you get to watch football all day. It truly is a great holiday. Enjoy spending time with your loved ones if you're fortunate enough for that. But just enjoy the time off if you get it as well. So this is pretty good. EE takes converge. Absolutely. That's a good math phrase. Happy Thanksgiving, Sumer. Again, we 100% appreciate all of you. Tell somebody about the show. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Really enjoy being able to interact with all of you. So for Thomas Dimitroff, for Eric Eager, this has been the Sumer Sports Show.